Hello and welcome back to the Tough Cover Radio Show / the College Football Big Brain Show. A little combo action here with me and Ryan Beef Coil. You can follow over on Twitter at Ryan Coil 35 and check out everything he's got going on over at Beef Up Front. I know he was previewing the games with Joseph earlier on Thursday night when we're recording this, but we're going to be playing this on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So this is your college football week 11 preview. Ryan, I think that's the first time I've ever called you Ryan on a show and not Beef, but Beef. Let me correct that. How sad does it make you that we're in the double digits? We're already at week 11 here.
That's what I've been saying to my buddy Joe every time. I'm like, wow, week after week. And it's like you're looking at schedules and it's like, wow, some teams only have 3 games left, including this week. It's pretty insane. It feels like I was counting down from 100 days to that Georgia Tech Florida State game. And look where Florida State's sitting now. And here we are. Big time SEC elimination game, most likely between Alabama and LSU on Saturday night. You got another big one in Georgia, Ole Miss. But those first playoff rankings came out. The bracket looks so good with the teams in it. I'm starting to get really excited for December to come and the playoff to get started.
Yeah, I guess that's where we should start. Any big takeaways from the bracket for you? I kind of always take the opinion of like most of it works itself out.
Yeah.
Wake me up in a couple weeks about the college football rankings. The only thing that I noticed that I think is noteworthy is that I think they put Boise in a spot where Boise State might be able to jump up and not just be the 12 seed. Like, could they get to an 8 seed and host a home playoff game? Could they get to a 4 seed if the ACC or Big 12 loser was crappy enough? Anything else for you or anything on Boise there?
Yeah, with Boise too, when you look at DraftKings right now, they're minus 250 to make the playoffs. So they're the heavy favorite. The second closest is Tulane at plus 350. And the third favorite is Army at 10-1. And Army, like, I think if Army were to run the table, obviously that includes beating Notre Dame next week, they would go, I think, over Boise just because at the end of the day, they have no losses and they beat the best team that they played in Notre Dame compared to Boise losing the best against the best team that they played in Oregon. So you said it at the beginning, kind of these things are going to work themselves out over the next couple of weeks. The one team I think that I might have probably slid in and maybe it would have been just over Alabama for at least this week is SMU. I think that they've looked really good recently, only had one loss. But I think whoever wins this game on Saturday night between Alabama and LSU will most likely find themselves in that top 12 next week.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a case that Notre Dame doesn't belong in there either. When you look at SMU's losses to number 9 BYU, while Notre Dame lost to did Northern Illinois win last night or did they lose? I know they were 4-4 going into that game. They might have lost to a non-bowl eligible MAC team. So that's a pretty big difference in losses. If I was an SMU fan, I would probably think that that's outrageous that Notre Dame's ranked ahead of them. They do have a great win there with Texas A&M, probably a much better win than anything SMU has. But and I guess that's kind of the decision the committee has to make there. But yeah, I mean that like glut of Bama at 11, A&M at 14, LSU at 15, Ole Miss at 16. It's going to work itself out, in my opinion, ultimately. So let's kind of shift over to this week's games and shift over to the SEC because I think the focus this week is down where it just means more in the SEC. And I'm going to start off with Georgia Ole Miss. And I think the parallels are so obvious with this matchup to last week's Ohio State Penn State game with Lane Kiffin not being able to kind of crack the big one there at Ole Miss, very similar to James Franklin. And then you have obviously a Georgia team that it's been so hit or miss week to week, but what you've seen in that second half against Alabama, in that second half against Clemson, pretty much the full game against Texas, those snippets, if that team is in there, they're the best team in college football, probably, maybe only behind Oregon. But there's too many games like what we've seen against Kentucky, against Mississippi State, against Florida. They're really letting some of these kind of bottom of the barrel, if not mid SEC teams hang around with them. I have no read on this game. If you made me make a pick, I think I'm taking the points with Ole Miss. but I am not confident at all in either direction. I think if you looked at my record the last 2 years on Lane Kiffin games, I feel like I'm batting like 100 on betting Ole Miss on or against them. I mean, last week I bet Arkansas; they lost by 1 billion against Ole Miss. So, where's your read on this game? Obviously, Georgia comes in struggling against Florida, whereas Ole Miss comes in flying high against Arkansas.
I think it's one of those spots where it's just you take Georgia and you don't bat an eye because they're not playing Alabama. I mean, until proven otherwise, it's cliche. It's the most kind of square analysis you can give. But I mean, why not at this point? Maybe you look at Ole Miss plus 2.5, but I think if Georgia wins, they're going to go in there and kind of push Ole Miss around and show them kind of who's king. You said it at the beginning, and I couldn't agree more. I said it myself earlier today. It's like it's a carbon copy of the Ohio State Penn State game from last week. It's like, all right, we got Big Brother at home. It's finally our chance to beat them, and here they come, pissing down their leg again. Lane Kiffin and James Franklin, Georgia and Ohio State going on the road and winning these games. The one thing I would be a little bit concerned about, and it might not come back to haunt Georgia in this game, but it could and most likely will happen once they get to the playoff and if they make it to a Final Four against one of those upper echelon in Ohio State and Oregon, a Texas again, maybe who knows who they meet up with down the line. But Carson Beck has 11 picks on the year. Another game last week where he had 3 interceptions. Jackson Dart does not turn the football over. He only has 3 interceptions this entire season. So when you look at Ole Miss and the way that the offense clicked last week, and they didn't have Prescore and they didn't have Harris last week, and they still were able to put up 63 points, that offense might be finding their stride right now. And obviously it's a bigger test here in Georgia rather than an Arkansas team. But if Carson Beck's going to go out there and turn the football over, that's going to give Ole Miss obviously more opportunities to go and score. And Jackson Dart doesn't turn it over himself. So Ole Miss might have a couple more opportunities, and they're probably going to need that against one of, if not the best defense in the country in Georgia. So I would say that's my little bit of a hesitation of maybe not to take Georgia in this one. But I do think at the end of the day, I'll sleep a lot better knowing I took Georgia and Kirby Smart over Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin in a big game, and pretty much a do or die game for Ole Miss season. If Ole Miss finds a way to win this game, that's like a legacy definer for Jackson Dart because the next 2 weeks they have Florida and then Mississippi State. They're most likely going 10-2 and going to the playoffs. So huge moment for not only Lane Kiffin but Jackson Dart, kind of his legacy down there as an Ole Miss quarterback.
I mean, this is the season for Ole Miss. This is the era. That's kind of where the one thing about Ohio State, Penn State was that the game was bigger for Ohio State, bigger for kind of the incumbent almost rather than the challenger. Whereas this game, bigger for Ole Miss than it is for Georgia because Georgia goes out and beats Tennessee next week. That loss means nothing to Georgia. So that's the one thing that I keep coming back to as to why I think Ole Miss has a chance. But Trey Harris, one of their best receiver, missed last week's game. He's doubtful for this week's game. Didn't matter last week against Arkansas. Would probably matter a little bit more against Georgia. But that game's at 3:30. The other SEC game that everybody has their eyes on is down in Death Valley at 7:30. Alabama at LSU. What feels like a true elimination game. I don't think either of these teams are getting in at 9-3. So Alabama 6-2, LSU 6-2. I've really talked myself in as the week has gone on LSU being one of my favorite bets of the week. I think what happened at Texas A&M was an outlier, not a trend for LSU. They were up 17-0 in that game and just totally collapsed. And you could point to Brian Kelly and big games, yada, yada, yada. Well, Brian Kelly in big games much better at home than on the road. Here we are in Death Valley, one of the absolute premier places in the country to play, one of the toughest places to go get a win, especially in such a do or die game. And this isn't Nick Saban across that field. It's Kalen DeBoer. How am I supposed to know what he does in a do or die game in a situation like this? So I'm going with Brian Kelly in a big game, which that's a recipe for disaster. But I'm riding with LSU. I think that everyone is going to be on Alabama here, and I love getting the 3 points at home with a team that I think is better than Alabama.
Yeah, here's 2 trends for you in this one. Since Brian Kelly took over, LSU is 17-1 at home. And underdogs this year in the SEC, 29-13 against the spread, 69% cover rate there. That kind of opened my eyes. So that also goes back to, if you believe in Ole Miss, maybe you hang your hat on that one. But just like I said with Georgia, it's like I'll be able to sleep fine at night knowing I took LSU at home in a night game if they wind up going out there and losing. Hell, they could even lose the game still and you win that +3 bet. But the one major concern, as I said, with Carson Beck turning the football over, my concern would be if you're on LSU side in this one, look what Marcel Reed was able to do to LSU in that game on the ground. He threw the ball, I think, twice after he came in, but he really gashed them with his legs. Jalen Milroe, you can make an argument, is probably the best running quarterback in the entire country. He's going to have to make some throws, as we know. But if he's able to have that same effect on the ground that Reed did with Texas A&M against LSU, then it could be a much more difficult task for this LSU defense. I'm sure that's kind of what they're keying in on and honing in on this week in practice. But I do like LSU at home in this spot. I think you said it, but LSU outplayed Texas A&M in that night game, and they basically, for lack of a better term, pissed down their leg. They missed 3 field goals. They turned the ball over 3 times. They basically just gave that game to Texas A&M. And then we saw last week, Texas A&M, maybe what their kind of true colors were, getting absolutely blown out at South Carolina. So I do like LSU in this spot as well. I like them to win it outright, but I would take that +3 because I could definitely see this one coming down to the wire and losing by 1 or 2 points.
So those are the 2 ranked matchups. Those are the 2 big matchups of the week. Let's run down the other teams towards the top of the rankings and see what they have going on. And at number 1, we have Oregon, and they're going up against Maryland at home. Oregon -24, a pretty big favorite. Where are you at on this one?
I probably ride with Oregon there. They're starting to really look like they're hitting their stride, not really giving you any reason to not believe in them. For them to go to Michigan and beat up on Michigan like they did, I feel like you got to ride with Oregon in that one. And also, the way Dylan Gabriel has played, I think he's been looking a lot better as well, and giving me more and more confidence that he can be kind of that national championship type of quarterback.
Sorry, I needed beef to stretch there. We had a dog barking here. Maybe she likes Maryland. I don't know. Maybe Big Terps gal this weekend +24. I'm on Oregon -24. I'm laying the big number. I'm buying in on Oregon just as there's a chance that they're the best team in the country by a good margin. And I know that sounds crazy to say because they played Ohio State so close. In a game where maybe Ohio State didn't even play that well. But you just look at what Oregon has, and it feels like they have every ingredient. If Dylan Gabriel is as legit as he's looked in these big games, Justin James is one of the most underrated running backs in the country. They have 2 probably top 10 receivers in the country, maybe top 7 receivers in the country. I know one just got banged up, but Tez Johnson and what is it Evan? There's another Evan. I can't remember the other name, but there's 2. Evan Stewart. I think that's the name. Eric Stewart, Evan Stewart, something like that. But those are the 2 Oregon receivers, and that offense is clicking, and the defense is just as good on the other side of the ball. Obviously, that's Lanning's specialty. I'm laying them with Oregon there. Another one, if you're looking down kind of the slate of big games and kind of games that play into the playoff, Florida, Texas. And I wanted to touch on this one because Florida came out today and announced that they're keeping Billy Napier around, which is something that you predicted. And I thought it was going to take beating one of the big matchups. I thought it was going to take getting Texas or Ole Miss or Georgia or Tennessee. And it's not the case. They didn't have to beat any of them, and they're keeping Napier around. They're clearly looking better. I would still say I think that's a mistake. I think you should be big fish hunting if you're a program like Florida. 5-7, 6-6 should not be acceptable. You fired Dan Mullen for much less. So I don't really understand the decision. So, but where are you at with the Billy Napier decision, and are they a live dog here at all at +22.5 against Texas?
Yeah, I think you saw them kind of trending and getting better in the past couple of weeks. And that was my stance at the beginning of the year. I was like, if you just play DJ Lagway and they look like good, they look adequate, that's what you can kind of hang your hat on with Billy Napier to at least give him one more year. And the biggest thing, though, in that situation, they have an interim president at the top. So they don't want to have, a new AD, potentially a new president, and then a new head football coach. Like it would be too much of a cleaning of the house. So it's a situation where, all right, it's not going to kill us to give him one more year. have the young quarterback in Lagway hopefully continue to develop, and maybe make a jump to like an 8-4, a 9-3 next year. With I haven't looked at the schedule yet, but I can't imagine that it's much more difficult than this year. So I would say trending to like it's the smart decision. It's the right move. Give it kind of one more year as you get your higher ups in the university in place. I think that's kind of the big picture thing with them. But Lagway got hurt last week. I wasn't able to see it, but I saw it was a hamstring. He did practice the other day, I read, but I'm not sure if he will be playing in this one. Definitely don't think that they're a live dog in this one. And I think it's kind of baked into the spread that he's most likely not going to play. I saw it at 20.5 earlier this week, now up to 22.5, I believe. Texas, though, hasn't really looked that great and convincing. I think that they kind of they need like a beatdown type of game. So I think I actually would lay 22.5 here with Texas if you made me make a pick. I think they need a beatdown game, a kind of confidence builder to get rolling as they gear up for that A&M game, which will most likely decide whether or not they go to the SEC title.
This is a big spread, but I'm not really worried about the game here. We were texting about this team the other day, and you were there last weekend. I think it might be the time to buy in on Tennessee and to buy all the stock you can get. You can get them 20-1 to win the national championship right now. And I think if you made me rank the teams that I think can win the Natty, I think they're 4th or 5th on that list. I'm buying in on the defense. They haven't given up 20 points in a game so far this season. And I think that's going to be really important come playoff time, week in, week out, where you can't just rely on putting up 45 like a Miami. I think a team like Tennessee is going to be much better inclined to deal with that. And then you look at the offense, and yeah, has it been as prolific as we wanted it to be? No, but Nico's been still pretty solid. Had a really great game when you saw him in person last week. And then Dylan Sampson, 980 yards and 19 touchdowns. He's averaging almost 6 yards a carry. So if Nico's 9 touchdowns, 4 picks. He's not giving the games away. And then you have a running back who's, slashing you on the ground. Even their second running back, who has 54 carries, he's averaging 7 yards a carry. So no matter who they're giving the ball to, they're gashing you on the ground, and the defense, you can't score on them. So I'm starting to think that there's value here, that they're the 2nd or 3rd or 4th best team in the country. 20-1 seems crazy to me, especially I think their ticket to the playoff is stamped right now. And maybe if they lost another game and had to play in an SEC title game at 10-2, but you have the big win against Bama to hang your hat on. Your loss was to Arkansas, and another loss would probably be at Georgia. Arkansas, not a good loss, but I don't think it's a disqualifying loss. I think if you make that bet today, Tennessee 20-1, I don't see a way that it's higher unless they lose to Georgia by like 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and last week too, they only won 28-18, but they missed 3 field goals and they had 3 dropped touchdown passes in the end zone. Like, I think you could, if you just like plain like watch the game, didn't box score hunt, like that might have been Nico's best performance probably since that NC State game. Like, he was throwing really good passes, had a bunch of like big 3rd down conversions, tight window throws. And he looked like more comfortable. He just looked like more of a kind of a veteran quarterback. It was against Kentucky, who, if you're going to say one good thing about them, the defense is pretty solid. But I am still, and like talking to the Tennessee fans themselves, worried about like the slow starts. Like, it was 10-7 going into the half. And that was kind of Heupel's MO the past few years, at least at Tennessee, that super fast starting team. He was like the best against the spread coach of all time in college football in the first half. And then he kind of has been struggling these past couple of weeks. So that's one thing that they might be a little bit concerning. But when you have that really good defense, it helps you buy some time. So I definitely think Tennessee is certainly a player in this mix, but I do think it's ultimately kind of going to come down to how do they look against Georgia next week, and are they able to kind of compare with them? And if they win that game, there's still a path for them to go to the SEC title game as well.
And then the two kind of stories of college football have been Indiana at 9-0, ranked number 8, and then the Mormons of BYU, ranked number 9, sitting there at 8-0. I would say both teams still getting pretty disrespected this week when it comes to the line, more so BYU. BYU at Utah. BYU is -3. I know Utah, historically, an extremely tough place to play. This is a rivalry. It's not going to be an easy win. But, man, does that feel disrespectful to BYU with how bad Utah has been. Utah sitting there at 4-4, potentially the most disappointing team in the country, potentially there with the Utah Utes. And then you have Indiana playing maybe the other most disappointing team in the country in the Michigan Wolverines. And that line has ballooned from 11.5 up to 14.5. You're wearing the shirt. I'm still back in Indiana. I'm still back in the Hoosiers. I just got out of the Hoosier state. I'm back in PA now, but I think Indiana puts it on them big. I just don't think Michigan's going to be able to keep up.
Yeah, I think at this point it's kind of like my stance with the Detroit Lions right now. It's like just bet them against the spread and just hope for the best. But they've just been dominating each and every week, and they haven't given you a reason not to take them against the spread. And you see 14 Indiana, Michigan. It's like why the hell is that the case? But it's kind of just like watch it, just look at their scores. It doesn't matter who they play, who's in front of them. They have a beatdown on pretty much just about everyone. So I definitely like Indiana this week. But I'm actually on Utah in this one. And
okay.
Yeah, you were saying that Utah may be one of the most disappointing teams in the country. Like when you would look at this matchup, you would expect the records to be kind of first, the ranking to be on Utah's side. But this is like I've heard and I've read and like multiple different things this week. And I know this was always a big rivalry, but people are saying that this is the most hated rivalry like in all of college football. So if you're going to do anything to make mark on a lost season, a bad season, like this is the game that Utah gets up for at home, Super Bowl for them this season, have a chance to ruin BYU's perfect record, maybe ruin their chance to go to the Big 12 title game, kind of all that in one. And it's a really low number there. It's one of those like head scratchers, does Vegas know type of situation. So I'm going to take Utah to get up for this one. BYU, you said it has been a great story. It has been an awesome team, like right there kind of with Indiana, right there with Vanderbilt. I think you can throw into that mix as well. But they've also had narrow escapes of Baylor and Oklahoma State in the past few weeks where they needed kind of some late heroics and a touchdown to win late in the fourth quarter. So I think they could be due for a slip up. I'm going to have Utah get up for this one, Super Bowl type thing. I would take it the +4, but I think that they're going to win this one outright as well.
And then the next game I want to talk about before we just open it up to whatever games we want to openly talk about is Colorado at Texas Tech. And I think Colorado should be right there with Indiana and BYU as being the story of college football, but feels like people just have Colorado fatigue from last year, which is a shame that people wanted to pay attention last year when they stunk and nobody cares now that Deion has performed, in my opinion, like from when he took it over to now, one of the better like 18 months or however long this stretch has been of a turnaround in college football of recent memory. That Colorado was a joke in every intents and purposes. Like they won one game, but for years before that, I don't know what the last bowl game that they made before Deion came aboard. And in the last 4 games specifically, how Colorado stepped up. You beat the crap out of UCF on the road in a tough place to play. You come home and you lose by a field goal in a really tight one to Kansas State that you absolutely could have won, but you played great in the game and just lost to a pretty good team there. Then you beat the crap out of Arizona on the road. You handle Cincinnati, who's played close games with everybody. You took care of them and kind of kept them at arm's length the whole time. They had a bye last week. Texas Tech had their biggest win of Joey McGuire's era as head coach there. A big emotional win on the road at Iowa State in a game that it felt like neither team wanted to win for a while of that game, going back and forth. But I love Colorado here. It's my favorite bet of the week. And I think Colorado, I know you have a stat that would help me out here.
Yeah, we're on the same side of a lot of plays this week. I think this is a great spot here for Colorado. When you look at Colorado, they throw the ball the 15th most in the country of any team at 38.6 attempts per game. They are playing a Texas Tech defense that is the second worst passing defense in the entire country. They are giving up 307.2 yards per game through the air. So this is a great spot for Travis Hunter, for Jimmy Horn to go out there and make their mark against the secondary with Shedeur Sanders throwing them the ball. And I think Colorado, too, might have been the biggest winner from last week. They got to sit on their couch, as you said, watch Kansas State and Iowa State lose, put Colorado right back in the mix for the Big 12 title game. And Travis Hunter basically got to sit there and rest that shoulder and get ready to go out there and play whatever his 120, 130 snaps this week. Texas Tech, though, I think has also been like quietly one of the more under talked about programs this year, one of the more underrated programs going at 6-3. If they get a win here against Colorado and what they've been able to do this year and go to 7-3, that would be another pretty cool story in college football. But I really like Colorado. I think their strength comes from their passing game, and they're going to be able to exploit this Texas Tech secondary. So I like Colorado to win this one and cover that 3.5.
And Texas Tech has been definitely a good turnaround there. It is still the same Texas Tech team that got smoked by Baylor at home by like 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, it's a 6.5 point favorite too.
And then they lost to TCU the next week as a favorite. I think they were favored in that game as well on the road at TCU. So a big win for them last week, but I don't know what tells me that they're going to continue that against the team in Colorado that I think is more talented than them, just to be honest. Yeah. So I like Colorado a lot there. Another one of my next favorite bet, and then I'll open it up to give your favorite bet. My favorite bet's Colorado, but my second one, I can't believe I'm doing it to myself after last week and the collapse. The fact that we had Duke at plus 21. They're down 1 point with 10 minutes to go, and they lose the game by 22 points. Just unbelievable stuff. If you would have told me Duke had 31 going into the fourth quarter, I would have felt pretty darn good about covering plus 21. But I'm not gonna let it not take me away from what I think is a crazy line. I think the dumbest line on the board this week is Duke being a 3.5 point underdog to a terrible NC State team. This NC State team, to talk about, I don't even know what they're – because NC State wasn't supposed to be Utah. They weren't supposed to be Florida State. It's hard to call them the most disappointing team in the country, but people were propping them up as a potential sleeper, and boy, are they sleeping. They're at 5-4. I know that they've been a little better lately. They just blew Stanford out. They beat Cal as a big favorite, they beat them in a close game, a 1-point win. But they still lost to Syracuse and Wake Forest in the last month. More emphasis on the Wake Forest loss. I know Duke really collapsed down the stretch, but you look at the games Duke's lost, and they lost to SMU and Miami in the last the two best teams in the ACC, and they gave both of them a pretty good fight.
Yeah, I think when you look at this one, it's kind of just they're giving the home field team the 3 points here. Could see it going any way in this game potentially. But yeah, I think when you're looking just straight football, X's and O's, Duke has been the better squad this year, and they put up, as you said, a really good fight. They should have beat SMU. They had the walk-off field goal that they missed, or that was the one that the guy hurdled and blocked, and then last week against Miami had a chance to potentially win that outright too. But Bailey's looked pretty solid at quarterback actually for NC State. He's given that offense a little bit more juice than Grayson McCall had. So not a game that I'm touching, but can certainly see where you're coming from with that Duke side.
What's your favorite bet we haven't touched on?
It's kind of a sicko bet. It's a dog in this one, but I like Wake actually at home +7 on Friday night against Cal. You have Cal making the cross-country trip. I don't think that they deserve to be a 7-point favorite over anyone. I believe Cal is either 1-3 or 0-4 in the ACC. And Wake Forest, not a great team by any stretch, but they're sitting there at 4-4, a home game, going from California to North Carolina on a Friday night. I kind of like Wake Forest there in a dog spot, +7. I think they could be a live dog in that one as well.
I talked about that on Brace. He made me give out a pick on some of the night games, and I touched on Cal. Wilcox, historically great against the spread as an underdog, historically terrible against the spread as a favorite. I mean, as we just talked about, he lost as a 9.5 point favorite at home to NC State. So he has been pretty brutal as a favorite there. Another game that I wanted to touch on is a team that just keeps covering spreads at an insane rate. And last week they won the game outright. It's Vanderbilt, another one of the stories of the year. I've got Vandy at +4.5 against South Carolina, a South Carolina team that I backed last week against Texas A&M. And I think that was the perfect spot to back South Carolina. And now I think it's the perfect spot to fade Shane Beamer and South Carolina after a big win at home, letdown spot on the road in sleepy Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia is just, they keep underestimating him. He's a dog. They don't have the analytics can't factor for his dogness, and he is an absolute dog.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a terrible week for us because I have Vandy on my sheet as well. I feel like we're on too many similar sides here, but I think it's a perfect kind of letdown spot for that South Carolina team. Big national TV win over a top, whatever A&M was, top 10 team, I think, going into last week. Now you travel to Vanderbilt, who has been not afraid of anyone. And when you look at Vanderbilt's schedule after this, LSU and Vandy. This is LSU and Tennessee. This is Vandy's probably best chance to get to 7 wins. And that would be the most wins that they had since they had 9 wins in 2013. So kind of a huge opportunity as Lee continues to build this program here at home. And I think when you look at South Carolina, their biggest strength is that defensive line. Vanderbilt has more than held their own against Texas and Alabama in the trenches this year. So I think Vanderbilt is a live dog in this game as well. I have them at +3.5. Wish I had the +4.5 like you. But I also think we could be in for an under in this game at that 45.5.
I like that. South Carolina, really good defense there, and Vandy played an under game with Auburn. One last question for my two questions here, but for my Irish, playing at 7:30, playing against Florida State, 1-8 Florida State. I'm laying them. I don't bet Notre Dame much. They've been pretty good at taking care of terrible teams outside of one glaring weakness this season. And I think Notre Dame shows up and spanks Florida State -26.5. That line's actually jumped up a couple points. But Notre Dame, do you think that Notre Dame, where are you at with Notre Dame in terms of the college football playoff being ranked 10 there over some of the teams? Should they be disqualified right now, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been on the horse that like things will play themselves out and they'll find their way in. Resume wise, with NIU, do I necessarily believe that they deserve to be in? Probably not at this rate. Maybe if some other team has a bad slip up themselves, but I think when you look at Notre Dame, there's no doubt that they're one of the 12 best teams in the country. They've looked really dominant in spurts. And it's just a real shame that this isn't a good game, like a big time game. I think if you had like listened to any podcast or read any article about like top 10 games of the year in college football, this probably was on there. It's a game that I'm not going to touch, but I think as long as Notre Dame handles their business and wins out, they'll be in. Maybe they'll be the 11th seed. Some things might have to play out in the SEC and the Big Ten, but I think Notre Dame's going to find themselves in the playoff.
Yeah, it's pretty funny the way Notre Dame was talked about in the preseason. It was like the beginning game with Texas A&M, the bookend game at the end of the year with USC, and then the game in the middle of the year with Florida State. USC and Florida State both under 500. Florida State, like the worst team in the country. So who would have thunk that, it's a Northern Illinois game there where you slip up and then the other two games don't even matter. One last question, and it's Notre Dame's next opponent for next week. It's Virginia, who is playing against Pitt this week. And I've got Pitt laying the points. Everyone's going to be off them because they looked so crappy last week. But if anybody watched North Carolina, Virginia last week, Virginia did not look much better. I guess that was 2 weeks ago. But give me Pitt laying the points. And my question for you, more if you have a take on the game, give me the take on the game. My question for you, I'm sitting here with Virginia under 4.5. We've got at Pitt, at Notre Dame, SMU at home, and then at Virginia Tech. Is Virginia putting another win on the board this season?
As weird as it sounds, I would say this week is probably their best chance. Like a demoralizing game last week for Pitt. If you made me make a decision, I would probably say that they lose out. But also, who knows what Virginia Tech team you get? Like they've looked really good in spurts, and like it wouldn't surprise me if they beat Clemson this week at home. But it also wouldn't surprise me if they got blown out by 30. So, if you made me make a pick, I'd say that they lose out. But I'd say this week probably is actually their best chance. Get like a Pitt team that might be a little bit dead in the water right now.
Yeah, Virginia Tech, what a collapse last week against Syracuse. What a joke that was. But Virginia Tech, I had no idea when I was betting on them that Drones was out. So that would have helped. That would have been helpful information. So I don't know what Drone's status is for the Clemson game. Yeah. I liked Virginia Tech, and I think the line is telling you a lot there with them being only a 6-point dog. Any game we didn't get to before we get out of here that we didn't mention that you're on one side or the other?
I kind of like Army -5.5. I think that's actually going to be a sneaky good game against North Texas. North Texas puts up like 40, 50 points on a regular basis. But I think when you look at Army I know that they throw the ball a little bit more than usual this year, but they still have that ability to go out there and run the ball 50 times and keep North Texas off the field. Army still has not trailed at any point this season. So I'll take them -5.5. Another game that I was looking at was Iowa State -3 at Kansas. That's a real kind of head scratcher. Why is that the line? But you got to think Iowa State, they're not dead at all. Like they still have something to play for. So big time kind of get back up on your feet game there. And then every single season I do it no matter what. And it's disappointing to do it coming off of last week, but Penn State at the whiteout. I take it every single year. They're -13 against Washington this week on Saturday.
I had no idea. I had no idea that the whiteout was this weekend.
Well, they've had like 2 fake whiteouts already.
What a joke. What a joke of a program that is.
Yep.
But that's going to wrap it up. Thanks so much to Beef there. We're going to continue on the other side. By the way, follow Beef at RyanCool35. Check out everything he's got going on over there at Beef Up Front and checking in with Sean Brace weekly over on the Daily Ticket. Keep it locked to the other side right here on the Tough Cover Radio Show.